Hello, and welcome to part 2 of 3 of an introduction to the war against the E-boats, basically. As suggested by Paul, and it's patron number 7. So, I forgot this at the beginning of the last one, so I'm going to remind myself to do it this time. If you do like my videos, please do subscribe. I'm happy to just to watch, but please do subscribe, because I always like subscribers. It means me and YouTube have a more positive relationship. And there's also a little bell down there. So if you subscribe and you press the bell, you get told when more of these videos come out. And I do try and produce a fair number of videos to keep you entertained. Also to basically mean I get to keep teaching naval history as much as I can. I enjoy it. At the moment, it's kind of online teaching, not the same. It's still good to see the students and chat with them, but it's not the same. Anyway, so after Dunkirk, part 2. Because Dunkirk, the loss of a destroyer was ouch for the Royal Navy. Coming face to face with the E-boats was painful. And immediately they started planning. So this is some of the bits that go on. You have the Vosper Type 1941 comes in. You have, of course, the introduction of radar, and primarily you have the air battle going on above, but that's not as big a part of it as often you would think with the E-boat war, because E-boats often operated at night and were used at night, and therefore, until you had air-surface radar and employed in enough numbers that you would have those aircraft going on hunting at night, for E-boats, the attacks weren't really massive. That came later on in the war. That air-surface radar was more important for the anti-submarine war than the anti-E-boat war. However, with things like the Vosper Type 1941 coming in, and always understandably different from earlier Vospers, because you can see that sort of shaping of the hull to assist the torpedoes in their launch facilities, and give them a sort of slightly better range. But this is, by the way, that's taken from navalhistory.net on the side, the outline, summaries. I decided I would put that up there because I want to get people to go and visit that site, because I've heard from a friend that they're not getting not as much views as they used to, and they're a very cool site, and there are links to them down in the description. Lots of interesting stuff there. So, the whole point, there are convoys going on, and there are various systems for how they're dealing with this. The convoys are flying around the UK. One of the interesting things, there are some very cool books about it being an unbombable highway and all those things, indestructible highway going around. But it's actually more than that. It's not just that the sea can't be blown up, it can be mined and all sorts of issues which you have to deal with. But when you're in an age where you do not have the level of road travel infrastructure we have these days, where you do not have, where your railways are already working at their maximum, and that they're already in peacetime, your internal economics of your nation are based on coastal convoys. And your infrastructure system is based around the idea not of one major container port or a couple of major container ports, and everything coming into there and then being distributed from there. But lots of big ports around your country where the supplies are brought in and then they're distributed from those supplies to their localities. You need to keep the sea roads going. And the war becomes a very vicious fight for this. At certain points, e-boats are being sent out in packs, and I'm talking packs of 20 to 30. Some say even 40 to 50 in some accounts. I wouldn't be surprised if 40 to 50 were assigned. Whether they all show up is a different matter. There is one battle which I've got to talk about where that number does show up, but the fact that it's talked about so much suggests to me that that's far rarer than some books I've read would suggest. Every time they talk about it, they seem to talk about the same battle. And all the autobiographies of the time talk about that battle as being something rather exceptional. But then you have some historians have taken it and gone, well, this was therefore, this is what they were turning up in 40, 50. Well, no, that was the exception. 20 to 30, a dozen more normally. And they didn't have a fun time, okay? The e-boats did not have it their whole way. There were all sorts of things being developed to deal with them. They managed to get the jump in 1940. In 1941, they're starting to deal with the Vospas coming out in large numbers, and the Vospas are fast, maneuverable, and quite well armed. Also, there's the Fairmile Bs, which are numerous. And the fact is, the British are prepared to put a lot of money and a lot of effort into these things. So, you have trawlers, you have corvettes, you have V&W class destroyers, you have all these things being ranged against them. Convoy protection is just as a big a part of the e-boat war and the Channel War as it is about the Arctic convoys and it is the Atlantic convoys. Submarines are still a threat as well. They can get involved. So you can have, honestly, the presence of e-boats is more an added layer of complication than it is an attack in and of itself, as it is a sort of, it's not a pure war against e-boat. The e-boat is a very big complication, don't it? And they are very, very dangerous. There is one account up here. In UK waters, attacks by aircraft and e-boats had added to the continuous threat from mines. Over half of the ships and 40% of tonnage have been lost close to home. Half the ships and 40% of the tonnage lost close to home to aircraft and e-boats and mines. That's not sustainable. So this is what happens. Yeah. The British respond. And the British response to the e-boat is the dog boat, the Fairmile Ds. And Malcolm Wright writes this well best, in my opinion. So I'm going to quote from him and start off there. Cooperation between the Admiralty and Fairmile resulted in large, powerful type of boat that could take on an e-boat and other German coastal craft and outgun most. Often armed with a 6-pounder forward, a powered twin 20mm mounting amidships, a single Rolls-Royce 2-pounder aft, also often fitted with twin .5 machine guns on either side of the bridge front, and twin light machine guns in each bridge wing, plus a Type 291U radar mast and a Type 244 IFF projecting as well. They were well armed. They were well equipped. Okay. Their top speed is 29 knots. Length 35 meters, beam 6.35 meters, draft roughly 1.5 meters. This armament I've listed up here is 2 single 6-pounder guns, 4 20mm Oricon cannons, as mounted as 2 single and 1 twin, 2 twin Vickers K guns, 4 light boat depth charges. That's standard convoy routing. The other listing I gave was for an attack gunboat routing. They come in so many different variations. The Germans often don't know quite what one they're fighting until it gets really close and opens fire. And these are used for the convoy war. There is one example, which is, it could be a fair mile B, but I think it's a D from the description. There were E-boat attacks which kept getting inside the convoys. And it seemed to be that there was a couple of specialist crews who were managing to really specialize in drifting into convoys somehow. Probably they were just getting lucky. But they were causing problems. And the trouble is when you're using radar is if the thing isn't moving, it's just moving with the bobbing to sea, an early radar, you're not quite sure whether it's something which is something or not something. It could be a piece of wreckage. It could be a large buoy. They're not moving. They haven't got movement. They haven't got anything direction. Only seem to be moving relatively in the current, very, very low speed. It's quite easy to sort of write it off and go, ooh. So what happens is the next time they're covering it, one of the deep boats decides to sit inside a convoy. They cover inside the convoy. One of them is sitting in there. And this is where this story, I have found examples around, but I haven't found this exact story anywhere, but it was told to me actually when I was in Churchill College Archives doing some research there, because it was supposedly this vessel was under the command of Lieutenant RNVR, who was either a PhD student or something in the classics facility at Cambridge. I haven't been able to track them down, and honestly I haven't ever really looked that hard because it's just a cool story. But I will explain. So I'm putting in those prefaces before I explain it. So he'd adapted his dogboat a little bit. May have decided that he needed to strengthen his bow, and possibly fitted something which looked a lot like a ram, and maybe done a few calculations with his other officers and various chiefs to make sure that they had the power and the required characteristics to get up to speed and operate with the rest of the boats. Anyway, this is the vessel which is positioned inside the convoy. The E-boats do their thing. When they turn on to go fast and go through the convoy, well, they get lit straight up. And they really do get lit up. And one gets blasted with every single gun that this boat has. So I wouldn't be surprised if it's more along the lines I read out to you of the sort of the heavy cannon, the 3-pounder, the single 6-pounder, and all those sort of things. But it might have been the 2 6-pounders. It might have been various other weaponries. There's talk of a fair number which ended up being fitted with double or single or double 40mm on the back instead of a 6-pounder. And a 6-pounder is also quite a big, quite a powerful weapon. So one gets blasted by that whilst they crack up to full speed. The convoy had been motoring along at probably about 9 knots. They crack up to full speed and slam into the other E-boat and split it in two. Apparently it didn't happen again after that. Now, I like that story. So as I said, I haven't done probably enough research to be able to say whether it's a true story or not. But I like it as an illustrative story of what this kind of fighting was like. The British used technology, but they also were doing ambushes. The E-boats, to be effective, had to come and attack their convoys. They had to come and get them. You don't need high speed for that. Well, not as high speed. They were dirty fights. They were close quarter fights. There is, as I said, another example listed in this book. And I'll make sure I have the full time to read this out. On this repeat operation, no fewer than 30 E-boats were dispatched to attack the large northbound convoy. They came in a large number of small units and were engaged by a great variety of British naval forces, including 5 destroyers, dogboats, C-class MGBs, MLs and RMLs, short MGBs and NTBs, some of which were summoned by signal from Lowestoft into intercepting positions. It's a most unusual circumstance and indicative of the importance of this action that the dispatch of Admiral of the Fleet Jack Tovey to C&C Nor described it to the Lords Commissioners of the Admiralty on 8th of November 1943 was chosen as one of 4 coastal force actions to be published in the supplement to the London Gazette on the 15th of October 1948. The report is so complex and comprehensive that the section which deals with the dogboats is repeated in full. The dispatch indicates that the 2 units from the 50th Flotilla were MGB 607, Lieutenant R.M. Marshall, and MGB 603, Lieutenant F.R. Wright-Roller, comprising Unit Y, and MGB 609, Lieutenant P.G.N. Edge, with MGB 610, Lieutenant W. Harrop as Unit R. 606 doesn't get in there. Each of the 5 destroyers and the 8 units of the Coastal Forces craft had been allocated waiting positions or patrols to seaward of the most vulnerable area for attack on the convoy, which was around Smith's Knoll. Early warning of large numbers of attacking craft was given by RAF bombers which were dropping parachute mines off the Dutch coast. And at 23:18 hours, HMS Pytchley obtained a radar contact on E-boats well to the north. She not only drove them off, but also damaged one, and even more importantly, she was able to alert the North Command operations plot so no new dispositions could be made. In particular, 607 and 603 were sent northeastward to cover the inferred line of retirement to Umidden, and 609 and 610 northwestward to cover the most northerly track of the convoy. It was very fortunate almost all of the 16 groups of E-boats arrived in the attack area astern of the tail of the convoy, and the cleverly disposed defensive units prevented any attacks on it apart from one, when the trawler HMS William Stephen was sunk, having become a straggler from the convoy escort. Both Unit R and Unit Y were involved in the action at about 0140 hours, and both played distinct parts. CNC's dispatch reads, Unit R, MGB 609 and 610, moved up to their northerly position at about 0100 hours, and obtained hydrophone contact and then radar contact even before they were alerted by shore radar. From 0100 hours to 0141 hours, Unit R stalked the enemy, keeping between him and the convoy. As soon as the enemy showed signs of closing the convoy, Unit R attacked, twice forcing him to withdraw to the eastward, and the second time for good. The second boat in line, of which 609 and 610 concentrated their fire, was undoubtedly hit hard and forced to lead the line. This group of E-boats was the only one to operate north of 57F buoy, east of Schengen. Unit Y, in MGB 607-603, were by 0030 hours in position to intercept returning E-boats, and at 0206 they engaged a group of E-boats steering an easterly course about 22 miles northeast of Swift's Knoll Buoy. The unit pressed home its attack with great vigour and set 2 E-boats on fire. These E-boats were seen to blow up. MGB 607, Lieutenant R.M. Marshall, also rammed and sank a third E-boat. At 0400, MGB 603 and with 607 in tow obtained radar contact to the northward. Tow was slipped, and 0418 as 0418 as MGB 603 went in action with 6 E-boats at a range of about under 800 yards. As a result of being first to open fire, MGB 603 obtained many hits on one boat and probably damaged it severely. After a running fight, the enemy made off at high speed at about 0445 hours. MGB 603 then rejoined 607. The dispatch comments specifically on the actions of each unit involved and is very generous in its praise for dogboats and indeed for the part coast forces in general played. Unit R, MGB 609 and 610, the senior officer of this unit, Lieutenant P. Edge, showed a quick and sound appreciation of CNC's object in fleeting the unit, i.e. the defence of northbound convoy, and throughout handled his unit with tactical ability of a high order. Skillful use of radar gave him an exact picture of the enemy's movements and enabled him to go into action at a moment of his own choosing. The moment he chose was entirely correct, and there is no doubt that this was well-fought action saved the convoy from being located and attacked. The unit was unfortunate in not obtaining a kill, especially as a probable one had to be sacrificed in achieving the objective. Unit Y, MGB 607 and 603, Lieutenants Marshall and Lightlawler, showed admirable judgment and a magnificent fighting spirit in this, the most successful action of the night. It is considered that the claim to have destroyed 3 airboats is substantiated. Once again, the value of a 2-pounder star shell, both as illuminance and incendiary ammunition, was demonstrated. You can light up your enemy whilst also lighting up your enemy. This action also shows the devastating effect of the gunpowder of the D-class MGBs, an attack which is pressed well home. The results obtained gave clear proof of the very high fighting efficiency of these 2 boats. The gallant action fought single-handedly by MGB 603 against 60 boats not only showed determination to lose no chance of engaging enemy, but may well have saved 607 from destruction. To these rounding plaudits, the CNC added a more general commendation that showed that what a long way coastal forces had come after early doubts in official recognition. This action gives general proof of a great improvement in the efficiency of coastal forces, particularly as regards communications and use of radar. The small number of material breakdowns also indicates a high sign of interest in the handling by the CEOs and crews of the boats, and reflects great credit on maintenance officers and staffs of the bases. Furthermore, it clearly demonstrates the value and essential need of constant training and practice. The ambushes didn't just happen. It took a while to get to them, but that was the counter for the E-boat. Not a high-speed chase. We know where you're going to have to go. We'll get into position to make sure we're there to take you out. Channel Dash, 1942. Now, the thing is, the British had originally designed a plan which was all about stopping people going out, coming into the channel from the North Sea. Originally, consider that pre-war plan. The idea was there would be a mine barrage, again, across the mouth of the channel, and that would be patrolled by torpedo boats and sloops and other things and destroyers, and that would keep nasty people from going down the channel, and then you could resupply troops in France at will. That's how World War I have been. Suddenly they're fighting a war which isn't that. France is no longer an ally. And they have to deal with the impact. They have to deal with the problems. Now, this is going to sound very cynical. But from the British perspective, the Channel Dash was a win, whatever the Germans achieved. If the British sank the German ships, that's a victory. But if the German ships are now in the North Sea, back in Germany, and away from the Atlantic, that's also a win. Because things are set up to stop them going that way. I don't know. Going that wrong way. That way. This way. But stuff going this way is slightly more difficult for them to deal with because it's wider and then gets narrow. And because of where the radars are and where the things are positioned. Pre-war planning. The big problem for the British was always the Scharnhorst and Gneisenau being on the Atlantic coast. If they were able to be made operational and able to go from there out into the Atlantic, yes, the British had forces. I've talked about Force K, we've talked about Force H in the past on other videos. These forces would be hunting those vessels down as far as they could, but they prefer not to have them in the Atlantic in the first place because that would make their lives very, very scary and very, very upsetting. That is basically a nightmare. Having them in the North Sea, while they expected to have them in the North Sea, they have things in place to try and deal with them in the North Sea. That's one of the reasons why they were investing in 1939 in torpedo boats, hoping war wasn't until 1942. The interesting thing about the Channel Dash is that the torpedo boats get involved quite so late in the day, in that torpedo boats make their attack past the Straits of Dover, just before the Swordfish, and then there's the DD destroyers. Basically, the German force has hugged the coast the whole way up. And really, it has been a sort of nighttime get out. They left at 22:45 hours on the 11th. And they had passed through the Straits of Dover by 12:45 hours on the 12th. So it was sort of late night, early morning. But it's not good for morale of the coastal forces. And lots of those points that you heard in that book about, coastal forces have developed a bad reputation, are from things around the Channel Dash, it just getting through. And pretty much it's the lack of cooperation and coordination going on between Coastal Command, the air group, coastal forces, the sea part, and the bombing forces of the RAF Strategic Bombing Command, who were supposed to be scrambled to help with attacking these ships, and Fighter Command, who were supposed to be providing air cover and fire. And it's basically the time is all these commands are set up very well to deal with the threats which they're supposed to be dealing with, or prosecute them jobs they're primarily supposed to do. But this was the first time that their improvisation and coordination techniques were tested, and they were found not to work. And so they decided they had to work on them. Unfortunately, they decided to work on the St Nazaire Raid, and then you have even more fun because due to cloudy weather and due to all the scenario, the bombers don't do anything but alert the enemy that something is funny's up. And they really do alert the enemy something's funny up. If you've got strategic bombers flying around and they are just dropping 1 or 2 bombs at a time, rather than a stick of bombs, which is what you're used to and have had before, it's kind of weird. Then you get reports of funny movements out at sea, and you suddenly think you've got a surface attack. You start off with thinking you've got parachutists coming in, and that's why they're doing the funny bombs, to distract you from the parachutists. And then, you know. But there's our good old Fairmile B, which 16 of which were part of the operation. There is a Vosper 1940 Custom MTB 74 with 8 armed with 18-inch torpedoes. And yes, you are looking at that right. Yes, those torpedoes are positioned up above her bow instead of on the side. And the 18-inch ones are on 21-inch. And there is a reason for all this. It's very simple. The idea was that Scharnhorst and Gneisenau were being kept behind torpedo nets, and she could quietly sneak up to those torpedo nets, using the height above water they would have, launch the torpedoes over the torpedo nets, and they would then... Well, there was a debate over whether they'd be used as mines, set off by movement of sufficient force, or whether they would run as normal torpedoes and go and attack the battleship. Be fired straight at the battleship. There's a debate onto that one, and it's quite an interesting one, which... That's the Fairmile one. That's the Vosper one. This goes into in quite good detail. Yes, I literally went straight past it, didn't I? Yeah, went straight past it. Both times I managed to skip over it. The idea was suggested by her commanding officer, Sub-Lieutenant RCMV Wynne, more generally known as Mickey. The plan was to set up for an attack on the German heavy cruiser Scharnhorst. Okay, light battleship, not heavy cruiser. I love these books. When she was lying at Brest, the project was considered thought feasible and the boat was adapted for the purpose. 2 18-inch torpedoes, which came known as Wind's weapons, containing 1,800 pounds of explosive, were designed to detonate by delayed action fuses after laying for an interview on the seabed. After a slow, quiet approach up to the net surrounding the moored target, the 2 torpedoes would be fired so as to jump over the nets and hit the vessel. They would then sink to the bottom, and after a predetermined period, which would explode directly beneath the hull, breaking the ship's back with the water hammer effect. The same theory used later with great effect on the Mon, Sop, and Ida dams. What practical changes were undertaken to achieve the same? Well, Vosper's as-fitted drawing 9886 has been redrawn to show these, and 2 excellent photographs show her fitting out in Vosper's yard. Well, as you can see, those are the photos. And there's a fairly good photo over there. Also, these are the drawings. Lovely book. She's using a St Nazaire Raid, to the idea being that she would take out other docks if Campbelltown either failed, couldn't do her job. She was the backup option. And she did do her backup option. She did fire her torpedoes. Not at those docks. She took out some other docks as well. Gates. The Bs were your attack units trying to drop up troops. 4 of them are fitted with 21-inch torpedoes, and those are quite important in the beginning of the operation because there are 2 Hunt-class destroyers along with Campbelltown as escorts. And one of the Campbelltown and the Hunt, one of the Hunts actually have to tow the MTB and the MGB because they don't have the range behind them so they can get in. During their attack phase, when the 2 Hunt class stay back, 2 of the 21-inch torpedo armed motor launchers, 2 of the Bs and the C, take up the front position of the 3 columns, and you have then Campbelltown. And from memory, although there is a dispute as to where they exactly position themselves, you have the troop carrying female Bs divided into 2 columns at your side, and the 2 remaining motor torpedo Bs are sort of positioned in the rear area to sweep forward and try and protect. And they go in. But of course the enemy know they're coming, and it's not good. There are they lose most of their ships. The motor torpedo boat is, from memory, the motor torpedo boat is sunk. I'm sure it says it's in here. There was a tremendous firefight. Some of the commandos were landed, but others could not be. Owing to the weight of firepower, within the initial phase of the river battle, 5 Fairmile Bs had been destroyed and were sinking. Meanwhile, the MGB waited at the old entrance while Ryder went ashore to ascertain how effectively Campbelltown had been placed. By the time he returned, he found that almost half the old destroyer's crew had boarded the gunboat, and the MTB-74 was alongside. Satisfied with Campbelltown's position, Ryder ordered Wynne to fire his delayed action torpedoes at the old entrance lock gates. At a mere 20 yards range, this operation was not without considerable risk, and had the delayed action mechanisms failed, both the MTB and MGB would have been severely damaged. With the objectives accomplished and encouraged by the sound of the commando's subsidiary demolitions, those in command felt justified in removing the wounded and starting to withdraw. Taking some of the destroyer's crew from the gunboat, the MTB was ordered to make for home. Sadly, while steaming down the river, Wynne stopped to pick up 2 men from a raft, and the MTB received a direct hit, knocking him insensible across the bridge. By the time he regained consciousness, the boat had been abandoned. With the assistance of Chief Motor Mechanic Lovegrove, Wynne reached the raft and survived to be taken prisoner. In all, 33 men were lost from the MTB. Of the 611 men who sailed in the force, 169 were killed. 5 Victoria Crosses were awarded in the raid, all posthumously. Yeah. They do well. However, you've probably realized from what I've been talking about that the vast numbers of vessels, of motor torpedo boats available, were not Vospers or dog boats. Yes, they were powerful, and yes, they were present, and yes, those were critical vessels. Those were the elite. But it's kind of like a Spitfire and Hurricane scenario from the Battle of Britain. Far more numerous, very capable Hurricane gets ignored in favor of the sexier, more beautiful, sexier Spitfire with its lovely wings. It's the bees which are the common one. Female bees are the ones which are ubiquitous going around, and to an extent the Cs as well are produced in large numbers. The Ds are produced, as many as can be produced are produced, but it's far easier and far quicker to build a B than a D. So, you want to start coordinating your units. You want to start having radar far more powerful radar on them. Well, D boats are big enough and powerful enough that they can carry their own radars. The same with the Vosper boats. But some of the Bs and Cs, you can't really fit that greater radar in them. So how do you do this? Well, you have a Coastal Forces command frigate, captain class, like HMS Rutherford here. And this becomes part of the British doctrine from about 1943-44 onwards. Well, yeah. But honestly, it begins early 1943, but by late 1943, it's becoming pretty much constant, and by early 1944, it's becoming de rigueur. The idea is you have a frigate coming along, using its radar, coordinating things. It's got a couple of extra officers aboard for communications and things, and it's got firepower. It can fire star shells and these things. But basically, you have the flotillas almost doing that of MGBs and motor torpedo boats, going backwards and forwards under their command, sweeping the seas as they go forward. The idea is to drive the Schnellboots, the E-boats, out of the channel, to drive them as far as they can away, and to turn the sea, especially in the area around the English Channel, but also in terms of the very critical coastal convoys at this point, even more critical coastal convoys, into a no-go zone for German forces. Why? You're preparing for D-Day. You're preparing to open the second front. You need to do that uninterrupted. And we all know what happens when these measures fail. There are convoys which get attacked. There are operations which get absolutely exercises which get turned into massacres. But the thing is, they succeed more than they fail. They really do, because if those losses would have been, if they had been repeatable events, that would have been devastating. Their losses were bad enough on the one-off occasions, but no, as repeatable events, that would have been devastating. So, next one will be the beginning of the end. Right, I hope you enjoyed that. That's slightly longer than the previous introduction was. Slightly more reading from books. Slightly more interesting. And part 3 is going to be different again, because it's how do you block off the E-boats? How do you start to block off the various things that are coming in? And this is where we start to talk about things like 10th Flotilla. Yes, there's a reason I was very, very happy to get this topic. Thank you very much. Hope you've enjoyed this introduction video, and please do like, share, subscribe, press the little bell. Just enjoy the videos. Enjoy naval history. Thank you. Have a nice day. Yes, you do this first.